I've seen a lot. Amid the celebrity allure of entrepreneurship, many exceptional entrepreneurs remain shadowed. Here, I team up with these hidden talents to unveil their challenges and successes. Dive in with me to unearth entrepreneurial gems, learn from our experiences, and get educated. Want to welcome everybody to the show. Thank you for tuning in. This is actually going to be a different profile of conversation that we're embarking on today. I've actually brought back Charlie Kerrigan, who is my second cousin, who we had on the podcast. Young entrepreneur, owns his own landscape business, started when he was 14, grew it to, he's up in excess of $1 million in revenue, doing an unbelievable job, great entrepreneur. But we've been asked many times by listeners to hear a little bit about my story and what I do and what I've done and some of my thoughts on business. And so we've decided that Charlie is going to we're going to flip the chairs. We didn't flip the positions, but we flipped the chairs, and he's going to interview me. And so I'm going to be the guest today. And so Charlie, I want to welcome you back to the show as the temporary host. That's the word I was looking for. Very temporary host, guys. So I'm really looking forward to it. Charlie's a super inquisitive guy, and he's really, growth oriented. So I think he's going to be and he also has his own podcast actually. So we'll promote that at the end of the show, but it's not like he hasn't done this before. So he's got some experience interviewing, and I think it's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be fun. So welcome to the show as the temporary host. Appreciate you, man. Thank you for coming and doing this. And I'll flip the reins over to you.
Sounds good. Well, yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I think it'd be cool to hear your story. And I'm sure a lot of others like myself wonder who this smart bald guy is, being able to extract all this info off all these super cool guests. And I myself enjoy the pod just as well as everyone else. Do you mind giving us a quick intro, paint us the picture of like how things got started from being a young man? You were flipping over, I believe it's like clothing and selling stuff through high school and throwing around quite a bit of weight. Other than that, I'd love to hear how you got to where you are now.
I mean, I started like you, 13, 14 years old, out cutting grass, doing rolling lawns, all that kind of stuff. My business was the best business I ever had. Everything was 100% profit. My dad would go rent the equipment and put the gas in it. And I would just have to go knock on doors and do the work. And I think, back at that time, he was just wanting me to learn the skill of knocking on a door, overcoming my fear or anxiety of talking to people, And so I don't count those as any of the businesses that I ever owned. But when I was 16, I started a business. I was highly involved in student leadership. So I started a business, and essentially what I did was I sold any product that a high school or elementary school, and we got into colleges after, but that to make money, to raise for teams, students' councils, all that kind of stuff. And so we did sweaters, team uniforms, cups, fingers, fan towels, all that kind of stuff. And so I ran that for about 3 years about a year after I left high school. So we're 3 or 4 years I did it. Me. I didn't have any partners. Was very successful, and I was making really good money. And then I learned the first lesson of cash flow in my life. And I ended up, I didn't go bankrupt, but I went broke. I spent all my money. And I was out partying and spending money that I thought was my money, but it was actually just revenue that came in from my sales, and I hadn't paid my vendors yet. And I was partying and spending money ridiculously, and as my mentor calls it, pimping my ride. And so I ended up having to go back to my hometown of 3,000 people. I was living in London at the time, and I had to get my parents to bail me out. So they paid off all my debt. I think at that time I owned like $40,000, and I was maybe 19. So they paid off my debt, and the agreement was I would pay them back, and then I would go off to college. So So I did. I sold cars. I went and sold cars, and I made about $75,000 in 6 months selling cars. I was extremely motivated to get back out of my hometown and get back to the city. So I made a lot of money selling cars. And so I paid them all back, everything I owed, went to school. And then while I was in my first year of college, started another business with some friends. We started a leadership camp for kids. It was called Youth Leadership Camps Canada. And then, that went on. It just actually closed last year. So I think it was open for 30 or 35 years. My partner had bought us out and he kept running it. And then I've owned a leadership development company. I've been in road building, health clubs, spas, restaurants, senior care, senior resident, like senior home care, senior residents, the equestrian business. That's essentially my story. But the one thing that kind of for me, I've always been super hungry and always been driven to create stuff. And I think my hunger came from two things. One was, I grew up in a middle-class business. My parents had a business, and I used to sit and watch them. This is back in the old days when, you'd have a general ledger and it had a whole bunch of columns, and you had to enter in your sales, and like every transaction got entered, and they would do that at night, like once a week. And I would sit at the dining room table and watch my mom or my dad enter all these numbers in. And I kind of got fascinated with how it worked. And so they kind of started showing me. And then, so I really learned about accounting at a young age and, looking at numbers. And my dad was a, small businessman, but he was really smart and he really knew his numbers. And so that was kind of a pretty influential kind of piece. And that's kind of where it started for me.
Do you mind tapping in a little bit more on that? Like what sparked the urgency or drive? Like anyone can be good at like the numbers or the business game, but like you've taken things to like a whole nother level. What was that started that?
I was involved in student leadership. So there was like a very positive mental attitude. I remember, I had a little sign on I actually kept it up into my, like almost my late 20s, maybe early 30s. It was a sign that I got when I was 15 years old at a student leadership conference. And it said, "Attitude is everything. Keep yours positive." And every single morning I woke up and I looked at that. And I think that kind of just ingrained over time in terms of from a positive thinking standpoint. But from the hunger standpoint, I can tell you there's like when you asked that question, I, started thinking, when I was broke, so when I lost all my money, like early on, at 18, 19 years old, like it's a pretty significant, it was a significant impact for me. And I can remember I was working, trying to keep everything together. I was working 3 jobs. So I was trying to run the business and keep that going. I was working selling suits at Stars Men's Shop in London, Ontario. And I was working at the bar as a doorman, and I was packing those lunch trucks that drive around to construction sites and sell like coffee and sandwiches and chocolate bars and shit. So after the bar, or if I wasn't working at the bar, I would go, and at 1:00 in the morning, I would start packing these trucks until 4:00 in the morning so that they were ready for the drivers to come in and then go out on their route. And I remember distinctly, like, and I was broke. I pulled a car out of a junkyard, a Honda Prelude, fixed it up, $500. I can't afford gas in my car. And I can remember driving home. And the guys that I was working for, like they were Eastern Bloc kind of like, I don't know if they were, they were either Serbian, Russian, whatever, but really harsh guys. And they would yell and scream at you, go faster, keep going. Like it was, you had to really hustle to get this done. And I can remember driving home crying at 4:00 in the morning, just so distraught about what my future was and, what I had done and how I'd lost all my money. And that was a pivotal point for me in my life where I just said, never, ever again is this going to happen to me. And I think that's probably one of the driving forces for the hunger that I have today, to be honest with you.
Now, like, are you able, I'm sure there's many of them, but like those first few years when you were starting out of the growing these businesses, and once you were able to kind of get your head above the water, like what are a few things you wish you did differently throughout that process, and a few hard lessons that you're able to highlight?
Oh God. I mean, the hard lessons are endless. I don't think I wouldn't change anything. I think that, I personally have a belief that that's a futile exercise of thought. And, I believe that everything is meant to be. Nobody ever has a breakthrough in good times. All the breakthroughs happen when you are pushed to the edge, and are forced to either, you know, stop and quit the game of business or learn and move forward. And so to say that I, have any regrets, I don't have any regrets. Have I made lots of bad decisions? Absolutely, millions of them. There's the world of business. There's a cemetery with a whole bunch of business names on the headstones in that cemetery, and I got a few in there. So, but I've also lost. I've also won more obviously than I've lost, but no, there's no regrets. I mean, there's lots of learning lessons along the way. I think just like anybody who's listening to this podcast, um, you know, the, you know, I mean, I've been in some really bad spots. I've probably been bankrupt almost, close to 4 to half a dozen times. Most recently, close to up to 10 or 12 years ago, I, made an investment. Actually, I made two investments. Both of them were going the wrong way. I was pretty much chips in. And I can remember sitting in the, at the time my marriage is completely upside down. Um, I've got two investments in companies or businesses that we've created that are pretty much not upside down, but they're really going in the wrong way. And I can remember sitting in the kitchen, this is only, it wouldn't be 12 years ago, probably 10. And I can remember just sitting in the kitchen with my hand on my head, stuck in the corner of where the cabinets meet. And, there's a defining moment where it was like, you're asking yourself, like, what the hell am I going to do? And, you're at the precipice of, do I pull back and shut it down and just accept defeat? Or do you drive forward? And I mean, I'm of the nature of, I'm a drive forward kind of guy. I mean, but that doesn't mean that I don't think about, quitting sometimes. It gets hard. This business is a hard fucking game. This is, I think like when you're looking at starting a business or you're looking at buying a business or there's three components that are required. The first one is absolute clarity. The second one is will. And the third one's resources. And so like most people, and I've made this mistake so many times myself, most people, when they're starting to, either when they look at a problem, even when they're looking at problems in business and trying to solve a problem, but even when they're getting into a business, I have so many people who have said, well, I've got this business idea and, I've given some thought and I'm going to do this. And you think to yourself, boy, that's going to be a headstone in that graveyard, because they just haven't done the thinking. They haven't gone through and figured out, like, what does the customer want? What is our product or service going to be? How am I going to define it? How am I going to sell it? How am I going to market it? What people do I need? What culture do I want to create? What's the brand going to look like? What might HR look like? How are we going to distribute it? What's the competition doing? What's the one thing that we're going to focus on? Those are the kinds of things that, have to be critically analyzed and thought about when you're about to start a business. And then I think, on the clarity piece, there also has to be this why. What's your why? Because if you have a big enough why, you'll figure out how to make it happen. But many people get into a business and it's like, I just want to make money. Well, if your reason is to make money, that's unless you are, grew up on the streets and living in soup kitchens, and that's a driving point. But even then, that's only going to get you so far. And then you're going to have to recalibrate your why. But I think that a lot of people struggle with asking quality questions to get the clarity that they need to really kind of analyze whether this is a good idea or a bad idea. And they just don't spend enough deep thinking on and getting the clarity around what it is that they want to go off and either fix or, create when it comes to a business. As the second thing, like from a like a will standpoint, I mean, you're in this game. You know how hard it is. I mean, and the problems don't stop. If you're looking to create a business because having a business is like having a baby, they don't go away. The problems don't end. And you got to ask yourself, do I have the will to see this through? What kind of standards do I have to hold for myself? Am I willing to set the pace for the people that I'm going to employ? Am I willing to do the things that need to be done to hold the standard and support the people that rely on you as the business owner? They rely on you to pay them so they can pay their mortgage, put their kids through school. It's a huge responsibility. So there has to be like a super high level of commitment to the process, or you'll fail. You will stop. Yeah. And many people have great ideas, but they can't see them through.
Now, what do you have to say to those? And before you get to your next point of like, even if everything lines up and it does make sense, like entrepreneurs are very optimistic people, and whether it's chasing squirrels or something new and exciting that comes up, when do you say no, even if it does make sense? Because we only have so much time in a day. If we have 3 businesses that all make sense, our competitors who only have one are going to run us over.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a really good point, right? There's a book called The One Thing. I forget who the author is, but I mean, everybody should read that book. I think that, I think what you're referring to is what I call the shiny penny syndrome. People who they start one business and, have a level of success, and then they think they can replicate it. And I have done this. I've had so many businesses, and it is possibly, and we talk about this in my mastermind group all the time. It's they're begging me to just get one business. We'd like to see what you could do and how big you could grow one business. I mean, and we've had like our businesses, like I am in the, our businesses are 2 to 5 million and roughly maybe a little bigger. And then we have multiples of those. And so, could you just go out and if I focused on one thing and grown a $1 billion revenue company? I don't know. I mean, I love what I do, and I know what I'm capable of. In the beginning, it was really, really hard. Today, it's not as hard. I have operators, we have managers, we have good partners. My level of business intelligence is completely different from where it was 20 or 30 years ago. What I can do today, I can do with my pinky finger what I could have done 20 years ago. So, it's an evolution. I don't know if there's a right way or a wrong way, but people have to find their own way. And they also, it's incumbent on the business owner to figure out, and this probably goes to the third point, which is the resources. What are the resources that you need around you to create what it is that you want to create? You go back to the first one when I said, clarity. What's your vision? Great. If your vision is to own multiple businesses, there's nothing wrong with that. But, go to step 2. What do you have the will for it? And then step 3 is, do you have the resources? Are you willing to, go out and educate yourself? Do you have the mental, emotional, and physical fortitude to be able to accomplish it and pull it off? Do you need partners? Who are your mentors? Who are your role models? Who are your coaches? These are all super, super critical things that we need. who are the people that you have in place to be able to do this? Because you can't do it on your own. Whether you're one business at $1 million, yeah, one person can pull that off with a bunch of employees. But if you are, 6 companies at 5 million, now you have $30 million, and you need multiple teams, CFOs, operating, COOs, all that, a full C-suite team, then you have to become a different person. And that different person has to learn, like, business success is not about emotions or glandular responses to things that pop up. It is business skills and accounting, understanding the language of business. There is no substitute for developing your skill. It's like a basketball player. There's certain things you need to do to be a good free throw specialist, or putting in golf, like any sport. You can take any sport. And business is an analytical sport. And so you have to know the tools of your trade in order to be able to do that. So whether it's one business or many businesses, I don't have that judgment. If the businesses are aligned, I don't know if ours ever have been fully, but we had a strategy that we were in different markets. We thought that we were recession proof, and I think we are relatively recession proof, but we weren't COVID proof. I can tell you that. So, that was a real, eye opener for us when that happened. But, those are the 3 pieces to me. I think, the other one I would probably throw into resources, identity. As a business owner, you've got to form an identity of who you are as a business owner or an entrepreneur or a leader or a coach or whatever that looks like. It's like, what is that identity? Because the most powerful force in the human psyche is our ability to remain congruent with how we identify ourselves. And that's a resource. And you have to be able to tap into that, in my opinion.
Now, for those just starting out, and I like how you mentioned like the identity, and we spoke of this earlier for the podcast, of like the person that takes to get something to $1 million. It's a completely different person from 1 million to 10 million, 10 million to 100 million, or whatever the numbers are. It doesn't matter. But for those starting out, like what's the first step, I guess, to learn that? Whether it's what's their first stepping stone that you would recommend for them to, I guess, bring things to the next level?
That's a great question. First thing I would say is go back to the first 3 things I said, right? And I'm not going to repeat them, but, clarity, will, resources. Do you have all those things aligned? If you have those things aligned, I think, then you really are starting to look and you go, okay, great. We have a business that's $1 million. Well, what's my vision? First thing is like, what is the vision? What's our aspiration as a company? And then the second step would be, mission. Are we aligned with our mission? So I'll give you an example. So it's like a little bit more concrete so people can understand what that actually means. So for example, a mission would be, my mission is to be a leader of the country, prime minister, president, whatever. So that would be a vision. The mission to that vision is, the reason, the why that you're doing it. So it's, whether it's to make people's lives better, right? So the vision of, I'm going to be president one day, the purpose or the mission, the mission / purpose is, or purpose statement is, I want to make, the world, the people in this country, I want to make their lives better. Or I want to raise economic, this, whatever. And then, so those are the first 2, mission and vision, for sure. I think the second one is that you have to have clear objectives. You really got to get tight with, that 2 to 3 year plan. Like what objectives do we need to move towards or create in order to get our outcome? And then the fourth one, I guess, would be strategies. It's a bit more of a shorter time frame, 1 to 2 years out. You're looking 1 to 2 years out at strategies. What do we need to implement from a strategic standpoint to reach our outcome or our objectives? And then on an execution level, day to day, reviewing those every 6 to 12 months, it's, the initiatives. What are the initiatives that we have to execute on consistently? And the key word there is consistently. I think, wherever you're at, if you're looking to move your business from 1 million to 5 million, it needs those things. It needs a vision, needs a mission, needs the objectives, the strategies, and the initiatives.
Now, is there any advice? Like, obviously the people of the organization is one of the biggest, most important things. And it's not black and white on when to bring in, whether it's the next manager or next higher up employee. Like, is there advice that you can give people in that position, or that are wondering whether it's the right time to bring someone on or not?
Well, you know what, that is dependent on what the business looks like, where you're at in the business, what your finances look like, what your vision is. Like, do you want to grow, and are you willing? You may not need somebody today, but you might need somebody in a year, but you need a year to train them. You might not hire the right person if we're talking about let's just call it a COO. I think there's a couple things. One, a team is super important, but the business owner is the most important. The business owner is the only person in that room that cannot leave. And so, it is critical that they kind of create and have that vision and set that tone. I guess maybe one of the ways I would answer that question would be really, so it's like useful and pragmatic, I guess, which is kind of the way I look at things, is like, because it's hard to say to somebody without knowing where they are when they should hire somebody. But there is a time and a place where you feel as an owner that it's become too much, or you can no longer track the critical drivers, activity, maintain the structure, the systems, the processes inside the business. And you will know when that is happening. If you're in the business, you're going to know it's happening. You'll have a sense of it. Now, your need for control might hold you back, from bringing somebody in or promoting somebody up. But your customers will tell you. When you start getting shitty Google reviews, when people are holding back their payment, when they're calling and complaining about the work that's being done, when they're not happy with the service, whether it's a restaurant and they're not coming back, or, sales start falling. And that's why it's critical to start, you have to monitor your critical drivers. You need to know your business. You cannot it's like my mentor describes it like this. It's like, if you were walking across, if you're going on a trip and you're going to take a plane and you're walking across that little gangway there into the plane, and you're following the pilot, and the pilot looks down and he looks in the cockpit and he goes, "Holy crap, would you look at all those dials? Oh my God." I'd be like, well, I'm not taking this fucking flight. Right? Your level of certainty drops drastically. And so in business, just like a pilot, you've got to know the dials of your cockpit. You got to be looking at your numbers and knowing. And so if you're looking at your numbers, you will know when it's time to bring somebody in. What you do to hire that person or to promote that person or how to identify them. Now, that's really ultimately you're talking about, like, creating high performance teams. And I don't know if you want to talk about that, but that was like, when you kind of asked the question, that's where my head went. Was because it's so hard to, I can't tell somebody, even if they called me or I'm coaching them, say, "Hey, should I hire somebody?" You have to really understand their business and have conversations to really be able to answer that.
Yeah. And like, I think perspective as well is like perspective is a big thing as well, of like, I think it needs said, especially now, people just being fucking lazy and like, "Oh, I'm not getting all this stuff done." But of course you are. You have this idea of balance in your mind when you're starting a business. It's like you're working 8 hours a day. Of course it's shit, you know? Do you mind touching on bringing on people and growing teams? Like once they do get to this step and they determine it, what's next? Because one eye-opening thing for us, and like again the perspective thing I just mentioned of like, oh, there's no people, it's so hard to get people.
Yeah, I mean, listen, recruiting is a critical point. I would just say, like, I mean, from my opinion, I don't think anybody's lazy. I think that they have their own priorities. And early on, one of my mentors at the time, his name was Harold. He said to me, he was very clear, because I was very frustrated. I had, I don't know, 800 employees at the time. And I was always, pissed off, frustrated, angry at someone or something in the business. And, he was very blunt and said, hey, listen, that's your judgment. He says, not everybody in this world wants what you want. And you're looking at them from your perspective of what you want in life, and they don't share the same values or the same priorities or the same beliefs or the same rules when it comes to work or whatever, or achievement or success. And so I think it's incumbent on the leaders, or the organization to really have a robust interview process to make sure that they are selecting the right people. Because the minute that you hire somebody, unless they completely bold-faced lied to you, the minute that they, what happens most of the time when we hire somebody is we're excited because we think we've got the right person that's coming onto the organization. They're excited because they think they've joined the right organization and working with the right leader, and that they're going to be inspired, and they're enthusiastic. And day one, they come with enthusiasm. If they don't come with enthusiasm, you did a shitty job hiring. And so you should probably go back and look at your process. But if they come enthusiastic, then, it's our responsibility to train and onboard and create, the right processes to allow them to be successful inside the organization. And I think, and this goes to kind of two things. So if we're talking about high performance team or building a high performance team, there's two ways to build a high performance team: bring people from within and identify A players, or B players, and move them to A players, and take C players, move them to Bs, and eventually move them Bs into As. And so, or go out and hire A players. So if we just stick for this time, talk about people who, like, we're going to grow them up through the organization. The way I look at it is I kind of draw a cross, and on one side there's high culture, on the other side there's low culture. And on the top, there's high performance, and on the bottom, there's low performance. So if you have a high culture, high performance person, that's an A player. And your coaching or your conversations are more around growth, because they're already A players, they're dialed in. And so really it's about, supporting them, removing, clearing the field so they can run with the ball, and just talking about growth and where we want to be and where we're going. And they understand the business and they understand the marketplace. And so you can learn a lot from A players. But then you have your high culture, low performance people. And those people are B players. They are, they get the culture. So their EQ and all those kinds of things are good, but their skill set is maybe not so awesome. So they require training. And so there needs to be a training plan put in place in order to shift them from B players to A players. And that training plan needs to be monitored, and the conversations need to be open. There's nothing wrong with saying, hey, you know what, John, what I really love is this, and this. And here's where I'm struggling. Is like on the culture side, amazing. On your performance side, here's a couple things that I think we need to work on, and I want to start some training around it. And it's just a very open, blunt. And if every single employee in your organization should know how they're being evaluated. And so, I look at it from those two perspectives, culture and performance. So on the other side, if you have a high performing person, but a low culture, I'd also put them in the B player bucket, but they need coaching, because they're high performers. So they know the business, they know what they need to do. So their skill set's high, but their EQ or their, maybe their values, their beliefs aren't necessarily aligned with, what the organizations are. Yeah, or their attributes. Great book. We had Rich Davini on the podcast. I mean, that is a phenomenal book. I would recommend anybody going out and grabbing that book because, he takes it really in depth. I think there's, 18 or 24. It's a great book. I think everybody who's in a coaching training position should have that book because it's like he does a really good job at separating skills from attributes. And so, and he shares some great stories about, people with attributes, but you'd have to go back and listen to that podcast. But those guys, those are coaching conversations. You're having coaching conversations about, what you see, what you'd like to see, how you'd like to have them, like alignment, congruency with the values of the organization. And then if you have a low culture, low performance person, they're a C player. And they may be a C player because they're new, because they don't know, they're young, they're inexperienced. They've never been, it might be their first job. So they don't understand culture. They don't understand performance. Like we don't know the story of their life, but we need to dig in and find out. And so a conversation needs to happen on both those sides. And I kind of frame that as it's an action plan. Like we need to create an action plan for this person to create progress. And if people in your organization are making progress, then, that's what people are looking for.
And is that where you draw the line between, like after that conversation, if there's no progress, like I'm sure you'd advise moving quite quickly as well with this process?
No, sometimes, an action plan could be 6 months, could be a year. If I have somebody who, maybe they may be a low performer, but they have unbelievable work ethic, or they have unbelievable commitment, or they have, there could be some things that you really, really like about the person and that you think that they have what it might take, then I'll spend whatever time it takes, part of what I'm able to do today versus what I did 20 years ago, by and large, a lot of that is because I have an unbelievable team around me. I was in my businesses 20 hours a day. I went a decade and a half, no exaggeration, a decade and a half of sleeping 3 to 4 hours a day. And, probably maybe once a week or once every 10 days, I would catch like 6 or 7 hours because I would be so dragged out. But that went on for 15 years. And I honestly, I don't recommend that. I don't think that's a great idea for success. And I honestly think cognitively today, I'm suffering because of it, but whatever, I did it. And that's all I knew. I didn't know any different, but I got educated. I, got some mentors, got some coaches, went on some, took, conferences and education and all kinds of, at all levels, and started to learn and increase my skill set so that I didn't have to do that anymore. And a lot of it was ego. Significance, I thought I had all the answers and only I could do it, which many business people have that. And I realized that, I can create more leverage if I train people more effectively. So, at one time I read John Maxwell's book, I think 25-Year Refutable Laws of Leadership. And one of his laws is if you can find somebody to do something 80% as well as you can, then you shouldn't be doing it. And I went, that makes sense. I can grow with that. So that became one of my mantras at the time. And so, on an action plan, I'll stick with somebody. Here's my line. I can tell you what my line in the sand is. And this doesn't mean it's right or wrong, or it should be yours or anybody else's. But my line in the sand is, if I wake up and I can look at myself in the mirror and say that I have done everything that I can possibly do to make this person successful, then I've got to cut the ties. That doesn't mean that they're not the one. That doesn't mean that they're the problem. the key point in that statement is, have I done everything I can do? Maybe I'm not the leader they need. Maybe I'm not the coach that can support them the right way. And so allowing them to find a better opportunity to grow and excel somewhere else under somebody else's guidance that can do it better, can relate to them well. It doesn't mean I suck. It just means that maybe we're not connecting, whatever it is. Maybe there was an event that happened that, they have it doesn't matter what the story is, but at the end of the day, that's my line in the sand. And I truly have to be able to look myself in the eyes with all levels of integrity and say, I've done everything that I can possibly do. And then I move to termination. And I don't think it's ever good to terminate somebody out of anger. It's never good to do anything out of anger, but it just might be that I'm not the right guy for them. So that's how, like, from the perspective of growing teams up, look, there's lots of conversation in there. There's lots of standards that have to be met. Like, there is, I have a very high level of standard personally for myself, and I have a high standard for the people around me. And I make it very clear, but I also do a lot of coaching and a lot of training around those standards. I don't expect anybody to do anything. I just have standards that they need to achieve, which standards are a performance and achievement perspective. That's all standards are. So my expectations of how somebody should do something or why they should do it, that doesn't play in the game, because expectations not met only frustrate people.
Interesting. Now, one thing you touched on and brought up there, Dwayne, is mentors and talking with the right people. And I'd like to add in networking as well. Like these individuals and listeners, and I've seen it often as well, of people like the grass is greener. Oh, I just need this answer here or there, opposed to just putting their head down and doing the work. Like, where can folks draw the line of like, sure, networking is great and going to events is great and putting themselves out there is great. At the same time, being in their business, actually implementing and putting the processes in place and moving the needle forward. Like, what are your comments on that? And over the years, I know you've done an extent of it.
Well, I think, first of all, it depends on the size of your business. If you are a $1 million business or less, then a lot of implementation is going to be on you. And, you should, you're in your business. I mean, that's because you can't afford not to be. But if you are a growing business, I'm going to throw numbers, but they really don't mean anything. 3 to 5 million. Then you are not the implementer. You should not be the implementer in your business. You should have people who are implementing for you, and you should be coaching and guiding and supporting that process of implementation and providing, you should be providing, the direction towards what they want to achieve. I mean, I think, like, I would look at it this way. If you have a large enough organization and your title is CEO, but AKA you're the guy in charge, there's 4 or 5 things that you need to be focused on that only you can do. And so, an owner's responsibility, or, in our world, an owner's responsibility is, number one, you have to be in charge of the org chart. If we have problems in our businesses, it's the first place I go. What does our org chart look like? If we're not fulfilling on service, we're not fulfilling on sales, where are the open gaps in the org chart? And if there's no open gaps, is the gap the org chart? Does the org chart need to be redefined, restructured in order to meet the growth demands of the business? And so managing that is critical, and ensuring that the right people are in place at the right time with the right skill set. That is absolutely critical. And I remind me, because I really want to go back and chat about A players and recruiting A players, because there's some real key pieces to that as well in identifying that process. But sticking with this, so the org chart's number one. But the second thing that the owner has to do is they have to own culture. Um, Only the owner can define what the culture is, and in your organization, I think it is prudent and important to have, you know, what your culture is, what do you stand for? I'll give you an example. We have four culture principles in our organization. Number one, pursue excellence. Number two, be part of the solution. Number three, show others you care. And those were the three we had. And we added four, which is train, train, train. I mean, everybody is responsible for training somebody. And so that culture is critical. The third thing, I guess, would probably, prioritization. What is the priority of the organization? And so, like, for example, like, what's the one thing? What's the one thing your business does? What's the one thing your business is known for? What's the one responsibility that you have as a business to the customer? And the owner has to have their eye on that one thing, and they have to track it meticulously. I think the other would be strategy, around, not necessarily strategy on all levels, depending on the size of the organization and the depth of your team, but the strategy around the number one problem that you have currently facing your organization. And that could change every 6 months or 3 months or 2 years. But what's the strategy for the one thing that is the biggest problem in your business? And the owner has to have their eyeballs on that too.
So have those four check boxes to have what you're doing. If it goes to that, great, we can spend time on it. If not, it doesn't matter. Is that correct?
No, it doesn't matter. It's no. I mean, everything has to be monitored. To me, in my world, there's nothing that falls in the bucket if it doesn't matter.
So how do we identify a distraction?
What do you mean a distraction? Like, in what way?
A distraction from, like, we're focused on the business, growing the business. What can be a distraction, or I guess even going back to like shiny objects, shiny pennies. Like how do we identify those distractions? And even within the business, distraction could be like another service we want to offer, or could be another town we want to service.
So, I mean, if it's another service you want to offer, I don't think that's a distraction. I think it's a strategy, or it could be an objective, right? If you go back to those things where we talked about vision, mission, objectives, strategy, and initiatives, if it doesn't fall in one of those buckets, then it might be a distraction. I think, but it also depends on where's your business and where's your team. I'll leave a team just a little bit early, in terms of, like, if we buy a business and we set up a team, we get them up and whatever it is, there's no necessarily timeline, because it depends on the business, depends on the team, depends on the marketplace, depends on the competitors, depends on a whole bunch of things. But I will leave them just early enough that it hurts, because that's where they're going to grow. Is like, it can't be just that set up or that easy that, they, and typically I'll get bored. That's also probably one of the other reasons why. but I think, but no, I it's gotta hurt. There has to be a little bit of, pressure and push where they have to, like, step up and step through. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to answer, like, because a distraction.
I find we have, like, what we just talked about, the strategy, we have all this stuff like set up, but it can change so quickly based on, like, an emotion or a feel, or like, if we can highlight the importance of staying on that, like, trajectory and understanding what the end goal is and where you need to push things.
I mean, emotion should not change your business. There is no place in business for emotion, in my opinion. There's nothing positive that is going to come from, you know, from an emotion that's going to distract you, because joy, grace, love, and happiness are not distractions. They're additives. Anger, frustration, pity, depression, whatever negative is a distraction. So I don't think that those are really, yeah. I mean, if it doesn't fall in those 5 things that we spoke about earlier, I don't see where the distraction is. Now you may have issues and struggles, and when frustrations pop up, that's just a warning sign. That's just I'm feeling frustrated with this. Why? Because something's not being done. Somebody didn't do either something happened that should have happened, or what's that phrase? Something should have happened that didn't happen, or something didn't happen that should have happened. And the owner gets frustrated. But typically, when that's happened to me, when I dig deep enough, the blame or the fault is usually right at my tiptoes, because I didn't follow up, I didn't train, I didn't coach, I didn't create a critical driver. So, most of the things that I always talk about, none of them I've created. There's nothing here that you can't go find in somebody's book that they wrote, because I don't think I'm not the crispiest chip in the bag. Like there's no university degree and doctorate of business, or, master's degree that I have, that makes me any different or smarter than anybody else. I just read a whole lot. I showed you like my encyclopedia that I've created. It's got, I don't even know how much content is in there. Hundreds and hundreds, thousands of pages of excerpts and lessons that I've learned from books that I've read, or courses that I've taken, or conferences that I've been at. And I log them down, and like, I'll read a book, I'll highlight it, and then I hand the book to my assistant, and my assistant takes all the highlighted pieces and puts them on paper for me. Or on the iPad, and all that gets correlated and logged. And then I go through all that content, and I pick out the pieces that I really want to focus on, and then I have them put it in a document. And that's how I created that encyclopedia. And then I review that stuff constantly. I'm always re-educating myself. Do I need to go to another conference? Sure, I'll go to another conference, but I have so much content in there that I don't actually get to, that I should get to. And that's why I love these conversations, because it reminds me, like, every time somebody goes, "Hey, I know you're busy, da, da, da," and they want to talk about business. Like, no, I love this, because every time I give advice, I get advice. Because every time there's nobody on the planet doing everything they say they should be doing. There's like, we'll have this conversation, I'll walk away guaranteed and think about 2 or 3 things that, you know what? We need to really focus on this on the business. There's a critical driver that we're not looking at, or there's something that I'm not seeing, or I've dropped the ball on having a meeting with, a department in one of our organizations, or an operations team, or something like that. So, learning is never ending, and you learn it doesn't mean you retain it, doesn't mean you keep it. We learn things. That's why, like, I get very frustrated sometimes with when I hear people, like, they want to solve all their problems, and it's like, like, the only people who don't have problems are dead people. The goal is not have problems. The goal is to increase the quality of your problems. That's the ultimate goal. And so to have an expectation that you're going to own a business, and after 5 years, suddenly, your business problems are going to evaporate into thin air. It's the biggest, like, so many people get into business and think, well, if I just work hard, put in enough hours, have enough positive thinking in my, and spend enough time or be nice to my people, then this magic fairy is going to sprinkle success dust on us. And it's a complete farce. I mean, businesses are a growing and evolving ecosystem that requires attention constantly. Constantly. Now, can you change the level of attention you need to give it over time because you've trained people up? 100%. I mean, that's how big organizations get big. Elon Musk accomplishes so much and just does so much for the world. I mean, he's insane. The guy's crazy, but he's next level. But I mean, he creates teams and he allows the teams to do, and he hires A players, which we need to get back and talk about, but he hires A players to go out and execute. And so you either have two things. You have a high performance team or you have a high maintenance team. That's it. You have one of the two. No. Because if you can have high performance players on a high maintenance team, but your team is high maintenance. And if your team is high maintenance, then that is on the owner to really start to focus on, hey, how do I improve my A players? Get enough A players, now you have a high performance team. That doesn't mean you're not going to have B and C players. You can't have a team all A players. Nobody does that. There's not a sports team. There's not a company on earth that has that. But you have a high performance team if your output is at that level.
Like I know previous podcasts, we've talked about going from like the technician, or you've talked about, not me, going from the technician to the manager and like taking that step and changing your identity as the business grows. Now, if we look at the other side of that spectrum of over-delegating, and before we get back to A players, how do we identify over-delegating, and is that an issue that we need to be concerned about, and where do we draw that line?
That's a really good question, especially when you're growing, right? Because, you delegate to people and they don't have the skill set. That's when you get back to like identifying, well, who should I be delegating to? Somebody who's got skill or somebody who's got culture, or if you have to choose. So being able to identify who your players are is really important about what things you're going to delegate to them, right? You're not going to delegate something really high end to a B or C player. And you have to also be careful that A players may not necessarily, your best sales guy may not be your most supportive person to others. Excellent sales guys tend to be lone wolves, right? So you got to be very, very careful. But I think there's an important point to make: the distinction between delegation and abdication. And so abdication is basically giving somebody a task and then saying, hey, I want you to do A, B, C. I'd like it done next week. So you've created here's what needs to be done. Here's the timeline that needs to be done by. Here's the outcome that I'm expecting. And then you walk away and you come back on the deadline date and think it's going to be done perfectly, right? That's like, you've just basically thrown them a bucket and expecting them to be able to accomplish it. To me, that's called abdication. Delegation is the things I just mentioned, and includes a whole bunch of follow-up and support and coaching. Most leaders, especially when they're inexperienced or ill-trained, because delegation is a skill, it's an art almost too, is, I'll give you an example. We're in the restaurant business. If I'm going to delegate somebody to clean the washrooms, people go, yeah, okay, well, you give them a bucket, give them a mop, washcloths, some gloves, tell them to go clean the washroom. Delegation done, right? Like, I'll tell you right now, you have a 9 out of 10 chance that thing's not going to get cleaned the way you want it cleaned. In order to do that, you need to train them. So there either needs to be a training protocol, and before you delegate it, you say, hey, can you just review to me what the training protocol is? Because I want to make sure that you remember, because it's really important that the washrooms are clean for our customers to be able to go into. It's probably one of the most important things that you can do in a restaurant, to be honest. And if they can't repeat it, then they need retraining. Then if I'm doing it for the first time, literally, this is how I mean, not to get so granular, but it's a good example. I'm going to delegate. I'm going to give them everything I said they're going to give them. I'm going to take them into the washroom, and I'm going to explain to them what I think clean is and all the things that they need to do. And I'm going to be like, look, this is going to take you, whatever, 15-minute job. I'm going to leave, and I'm going to come back in 5 minutes. And I'm going to check on them and say, Joe, I just wanted to come back, check on you. Do you have everything you need? Right? I'm there to support him. Do you have everything you need? Do you have any questions? And is there anything that I can do for you? Yeah, I had a question about this. Or, yep, no, I got everything good. I'm also I'm going in there to inspect what I expect. And if I like what I see, great. If I don't, I see the mirror's kind of half clean, still streaky. It's like, Joe got a question. Have you cleaned that yet? No, I haven't cleaned it yet. Oh, okay. I just saw the streaks. Now he knows in his head, oh, he's looking for streaks. Like, he's really going to come and check this shit out. Great. I'll be back in 10 minutes. You should be done by then. And then I come back and I check them out. That's delegation, right? That's the follow-up that's required by our managers, supervisors, leaders, whatever in our organization. I haven't looked at a restaurant washroom well, actually, that's not true. When I go into the restaurants, actually, it's one place I go to make sure they're clean.
And how long is this carried out? The other day on the phone, we were mentioning 27 days, I think, to build a habit. But this is is that how long you hold their hand for that? Or what signs do you look for to slowly ease off?
I think it's individual. I think it is. I mean, it depends on, there's, do you have an SOP in place, like a standard operating procedure? Is there a process for it? Like, or are you just like willy-nilly, like delegating jobs? I mean, I'm certainly not going to, if I have to hold somebody's hand for 27 days while they clean the washrooms, then now I have a low skill, low culture person, and they'll be on an action plan. And so, we're going to have conversations about that. But if it is, if we're talking about recreating the sales process for a new product that we're bringing in to launch, to align a current product that we have, it's probably going to be more than 27 days. My involvement could be 6 months. It will shrink over time. Or it might not be my involvement, but it might be the director of sales, could be the operations manager, the general manager, whoever's responsible. So, I mean, it is dependent on the size, importance, and sometimes cost of the task. And we have to figure that out. But how you get there is by asking the team, sitting down with the team and saying to them, hey guys, this is what we're going to do. We're going to launch this. How long do you think this should take? How long do you need my support for? What should my support look like? All these questions to allow them to help think through what is coming and align what your standards are for the outcome of the project. And so, if somebody cleans the washroom and they do a great job, it's like, Joe, you did a freaking awesome job. This thing looks amazing. It's like, he's like, well, I used to work at another restaurant and I did this a lot. Okay, great. Do you need any help from future on? No, great. Then off he goes. But if it's not so great, then we're going to coach and do it and see where they get. And if it becomes a problem, then yeah, they'll go on an action plan.
Before we keep going, A players.
Oh, A players. So recruiting A players. Well, the first thing that we you have to have is a extremely robust interview process. And I don't know, and I'm not asking you, but because I'm not supposed to ask you any questions, but what is, what is, but I'll ask everybody this question: what is your hiring process? For us, it's like an 8-stage process. So, you know, if you are, and if you are getting great hires out of that 8-stage process, awesome. If you're not, maybe it needs to be 10. Maybe it needs to be 5. Maybe it needs to be completely changed. Maybe you're looking for different things. It's like when you apply to a job at our company, and let's say you apply off of Indeed, you send in your resume. The minute you send in a resume, 10 or 12 questions goes out to you that you have to ask, or answer, sorry. And so before you even get an interview, before you even talk to anybody, there's 10 or 12 questions that you have to answer in order for us to pick up the phone and call you. And if we don't like your answers, you're not getting a call. If we do like your answers, you're going to get a call. And we like your resume, you're going to get a call. And then you're going to have 1 or 2 interviews. Then you're going to have another work project. Then you're going to have another interview, behavioral profile. Then you'll do a work, like a half day work or a full day work project, or on the job kind of experience, which we pay you for. And then after that, you'll have at least 1 more interview, if not 2. One of those interviews is usually a group interview. And another one of them is a review of your behavioral profile, where we try to sort out your attributes or your values, your beliefs, your rules, like how you're going to behave or in certain situations.
And what do we look for in the behavioral one? I'm sure it completely varies on the position.
Yeah, it's totally different between jobs. But obviously, like I explained, our 4 culture principles, right? It's like, we're looking for people. We're also looking for people with hard work, but the conversation looks like, the behavioral profile typically will indicate what people will do in a stressful situation, how they react to, depending on which one you're using, but different, profiles of customers or other people that they would work with, like, so drivers, conscientiousness, influencers, whatever. So that's the big thing is like, what is your interview process? The culture, again, they got to fit in the culture. They've got to have a great compensation plan, and it has to reward their behavior that you're looking for. You're going to, have a robust onboarding program. Phil Jones, who was on our podcast, he talked about onboarding. Like, after that conversation, we tripled our onboarding process. Like, our onboarding process for a salesperson is like 6 or 8 weeks now, because that was like, used to be 2 weeks, and we went from 6 to 8 weeks. I think the other thing, from a hiring and retaining process of A players is measuring them consistently. Like, when I say consistently, I mean daily, pretty much. There's pretty much nobody in our organization that's not measured daily in any of our organizations. Like, depending on whatever which business it is that we're talking about, there just isn't. And then I think the last one would be coaching continuously. There has to be continuous coaching. That is the one that I think gets more difficult. The farther you elevate yourself out of the business, you have to be very, very careful that your people are able to coach when you go away. That for me was really big. Now, like, I'm a big coacher. Like, I have unbelievable, like, high standards, and anybody in my organization will tell you that. But they'll also probably tell you that I will spend forever coaching you. To me, it's, it's really important to me from a performance standpoint for the organization, but more, I've always thought that when I've hired people, especially when they work directly for me, their success is my responsibility. You know, it is just, it's a responsibility, because my ability to be able to coach and lead them and find out how they work and how they function and how, they perform is dependent on a good coach. And if I'm not a good coach, they're not a good player, I'm not a good coach. Or there's just not a team fit.
So like you mentioned incredibly high standards, which is awesome. And I think quite a bit of people, or many people, lack these days, having their standards way too low. Like limiting beliefs, whether it's in like the person growing the organization, but also the team. Like I find people have so much left in the tank, and they're capable of so much more. Like how are you as the leader able to really find your limits and then also instill that within your people?
Okay. I'll ask you to hold that question for 1 sec, because there was one thought that I had, a couple thoughts actually that I had on around A players and hiring for A players. And so I just, there's 3 points that we really look for. Are people willing? Are they able? And are they a team fit? Those 3 things, like when we're sitting around a table looking to decide whether or not we're going to hire somebody through that rigorous process, those are the 3 questions that we ask. Guys, at the end of the day, we can have a long conversation about what they said, what you asked, blah, 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 and all that shit, which I hate those kinds of conversations. As a leader of the organization, those are the 3 things that I want answered. Guys, is this person willing? Are they able? And are they a team fit? And if you have confidence in all those things through the interview process, then thumbs up. Because a lot of times they'll come to me and say, hey, do you want to interview this person? No, I don't want to interview the person. Like, they're not going to work for me. Why would I want to interview? Like, I think that in my head, but I want people to make their own decisions, right? It's important for people to make their own decisions, because, people don't make the decisions because they're either fearful of making a mistake or what the repercussions are if they make the wrong decision, which there should never be. Because if they go with the right intent and they just I make wrong decisions all the time. Who am I to look at one of my employees and get upset with them because they made a bad decision? I may go, really? We did that? Okay. That's fascinating. Like, holy crap. They'll not make decisions because they're uncertain. They'll not make decisions because they lack the decision-making muscle. They don't have a strong decision-making muscle. So it's critical in those times to allow them to make the decisions when they need to make the decisions. But one point I wanted to make, and then we'll wrap it on but A players, like, to me, A players is so important. If you want to grow your business, serve your customers, and as a business owner, start to gain freedom and my two values, my 2 highest moving towards values is, number 1 is love. Number 2 is freedom. And so I'm always thinking about how do I get to free myself from all these problems that come up in the business. And it's like, I signed up for this shit, so I'm not complaining about the problems, but I'm trying to exchange my shitty problems for better problems. And so having A players, but you've got to be able to identify them. And so, like, this is really critical. If for anybody who's doing any hiring, or if you're training on hiring, this stuff is critical. This is really important. Number one thing that, not the number one thing, but one of the things that an A player wants to do is they want to have a scoreboard. A players want to know they want to be able to distinguish the winners from the losers. That's what an A player does. They're ultra competitive. And so in the interview process, I don't want to dig too deep into it, but I do want to leave people with, like, because you see these reels on Instagram or wherever, and people go, yeah, you got to have more discipline. You got to do this and you got to do that. It's like, okay, well, what is discipline? What does that look like? What does it mean? What are the steps? Like, all that kind of, so I like to so in terms of the scoreboard, if you're interviewing something and you're trying to identify, whether or not they have any idea about a scoreboard, I ask them straight out in the interview, how do you score yourself? How do you know at the end of every day that it was a successful day or not a successful day? And they'll tell you. An A player will know because they have a scoreboard. A B player will be like, well, I just know. Okay. How do you know? Well, I don't know. I just know. Well, give it some thought. I got time. And then I just sit there in silence because I'm about to hire this person to be in our business. And my number one job is to protect my A players. So if I hire shit, my A players, they don't want to work with C players. So they leave. And then that's how you get a really high maintenance team. So that's the one way I would figure out on the scoreboard thing. The competitive thing, you just ask the question. On a scale from 1 to 10, how competitive are you? I'm an 8. Great. What does that mean for you? Tell me about a time where you got super competitive. How'd you react? Tell me about a time where you're losing and you couldn't handle that as a standard. There's lots of questions that you can create around finding whether or not somebody is is competitive. I mean, the third thing, A players want is they want to be measured. They want to see every day, like, okay, they want to be accountable and they wanted to be rewarded for that. I think the other, and so depending on the industry, but like an A player, when you're hiring an A player, especially in the C-suite, like they've got to have done it before. They have to have the technical understanding and know-how to do the job. Definitely in the C-suite, they should have experience in the industry. But winners and A players know how to win. Whether they're doing it in, the service business or the hotel business or the landscape business or the restaurant business or, the car business, winners know how to win and they have a formula for it. And you should ask that question. What is your formula for winning? Well, I don't know your industry. Tell me what your formula was in your industry. And then put the pressure on and dig deep into that. That's going to help you. A players are growth mindset. Ask in an interview, what book are you currently reading to advance your career or your knowledge in personal growth? And if they go, I'm not currently reading a book. Well, when was the last time you read a book? Like high school? Okay. Then you could be fair and ask, well, I'm old, so I read books. But young people might, get it off of YouTube. So it's like, okay, well, how do you absorb educational information to make yourself better?
So identifying like their need for progression.
Yeah, for growth, you're going to want to find out, do they have a growth mindset? Like, are they actually willing to be able to spend the time to grow? Because if they're not willing to spend the time before they got to you, they're not going to want to grow in your organization. Why are you so special? Why is your industry so special? It's like we think, and I've done this. Like when I say stuff, I've done it already. I've made so many mistakes thinking I'll coach this person through. Oh, they left the other business or they left the competitor because, they don't know how to manage or they don't know how to execute their business or they don't have the right policies and procedures or they don't track their critical drivers or all that shit. We do all that stuff. We're going to make this person successful. If they don't have a growth mindset, they don't have a growth mindset. And you're probably not going to change that. But you could ask, if you wanted to be fair in the interview, you could ask a question like, well, what would it take for you to pick up a book or start educating yourself? What would that look like for you? Right? And you're making them answer that question. And then I think, the other thing that A players have in common is that they see opportunities rather than problems. And so, the question might look like this stuff's just off the top of my head, but the question might look like, what are the 5 opportunities that you see in our industry? You'll find out if they've done any homework. What are the 5 problems you see? If they can answer the 5 problems faster than the opportunities, you might want to have a red flag up. That doesn't mean, none of this means you shouldn't hire them. It just is more information to paint the picture of what it is that you're looking for. And then when somebody you take all that information, you kind of write it all down and say, hey, here's what I got. And then when the next person interviews them, or when you do a group interview, or when you do the behavioral profile, or when you're doing their work session, you're looking for these things and you're having those conversations. And it all ties in through the rigorous interview process. And that's how you develop culture. That's how you develop high performance teams. And it's a lot of work. And you need to have somebody in charge of that. You need to have a process. You need to have a procedure to make sure, like, okay, there's an employee file started on, if they make it through their first interview, resume goes in, notes go in, we're tracking, okay, tick, tick, tick. They're on stage 3 of the process. Sometimes it takes weeks to get a job with us, months sometimes, depending on what we're hiring for. Months is a little long, but and it depends on the level of you're hiring at too, right? But you can crunch all this stuff. Yeah, but you can crunch all this stuff in. You can crunch that whole process into a couple of days. Because if the people are available, it's like, well, they interview with you now, and then I'll go out and interview with the next. Boom, 2 interviews done in 1 visit. Yeah. Right? And then it's like, hey, we want you to come back and do a working session for 4 hours. We'll pay you. Okay, great. So you can speed that through pretty quickly, depending on their accessibility and your accessibility and the team that you have in place to hire. In our restaurants, in an ideal situation, there should be 2 or 3 people who are trained in hiring on the floor at all times. And they can go off and interview. Not managers, staff. Because like I worked in an organization that the owner never hired anybody. The staff hired them all. You were hired by staff and you were fired by staff. You were voted in and voted out. That's how they did it.
How did they structure that?
I don't know exactly how he structured it at the time. I was younger, but they just trained their people to do pretty much exactly what, I would suggest. You could do it with this process. Yeah. Or the process I described earlier, by training people on what to look for in A players. And then you just have staff do it, not the owner.
Right on. Okay. Limiting beliefs. Are we wrapped up?
Okay, yeah, we're wrapped up on limiting beliefs.
Yeah, limiting beliefs and like raising the bar and like I have it in myself of the fear of leaving stuff on the table, leaving gas in the tank. But like as a leader, what do you have to say to, I guess, the business owner, but also how is that instilled within like the culture and the people?